So I'm Alexis Lowry, I'm curator here at DIA, and I am delighted to welcome you to this talk on Imi Knoebel by Johannes Stüttgen. I am really excited about this. We haven't had a talk about Knoebel in a long time, let alone a talk about Knoebel by somebody who knows him well and has known him for a really long time. So this is a rare privilege. Johannes is probably one of the living experts on the German artists in our collection. So thank you for coming. I will give a quick background and then turn it over to you. So Johannes Stüttgen was born in Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic. From 1966 to 1971, he studied under Joseph Beuys at the Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf. This is, of course, where he met Beuys, but also Jörg Immendorff, Imi Knoebel, and Blinky Palermo. Palermo and Knoebel, of course, being central artists in DIA's collection. With Beuys, Stüttgen went on to found the art action initiative Omnibus, Direct Democracy in Germany, and remained a close collaborator until Beuys' death in 1986. And in fact, we had the rare privilege yesterday of talking to him about the last works that he and Beuys worked on together, which are in DIA's collection, and hopefully we will be able to show one day soon. So come back. Stüttgen later became the managing director of the Free International University for Creativity and Interdisciplinary Research, and the head of Raum 3, Beuys' former studio at the Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf. In 2004, Stüttgen received an honorary fellowship from Oxford Brookes University for his work on social sculpture. This is Beuys' term, the theory pioneered by Beuys, to expand the notion of art into the everyday, into our lives, art as being the thing that we do naturally by being alive. He is a co-founder and chairman of Kinderstern, Star for Children, a nonprofit organization that serves children in need, that was founded by Imi Knoebel, and which continues today. And Stüttgen lives in Düsseldorf, and he's flown all the way here for this. So thank you very much for coming, and I will man the slides. Thanks all.
Thank you very much, Alexis, for this very nice introduction. I would like to start by introducing Imi Knoebel and his art, but at the beginning, of course, is the question of the validity of art in general. What makes art valid? The validity of a work of art is not limited to subjectivity, to its subjectivity. It has to rise above, beyond subjectivity. It has to rise above it. And because it rises above subjectivity, you have to ask the question, how does an artist do that? How does an artist become valid? How does he achieve validity? Who determines what is a work of art? The answer is the artist determines what is art. But that is a vicious circle, if you want. Who is the artist then? This question is a general question. How does an artist get to his work of art? He has to open himself internally for this work of art that he's creating. He has to open himself to a work that is not yet created. but the work of art itself determines the artist. There's a very famous word, Joseph Beuys. That's the first thing I heard from him. I asked him, Beuys, Entschuldigung, können Sie das wiederholen?
Warum lächelt die Mona Lisa?
Why does Mona Lisa smile?
Und seine Antwort war, die Mona Lisa lächelt, weil sie mehr weiß als Leonardo.
Because she knows more than Leonardo.
Dieser Satz war für mich
And this sentence for me was a key sentence, really.
Hat mich eigentlich bis zum heutigen Tag immer wieder begleitet.
It's something that has accompanied me to this day, and I always have to understand it anew, because that's the secret of art. The work of art determines the artist, and that's much more interesting than the question of whether the artist determines his work of art.
Daraus ergibt sich eine interessante Überlegung.
There's an interesting consideration. If the artist is here, this is the artist.
Und hier soll das Kunstwerk entstehen.
And this is the developing work of art. This is where the work of art is going to be created. That's the objective. And if Mona Lisa knows more than Leonardo,
aber sie ist jetzt hier wie gedanklich.
But she's here, she's present here. Then she has to
aus der Zukunft eine Energie entwickeln,
develop an energy from the future,
die den Künstler in die Aktion bringt.
an energy that drives the artist to act, drives the artist to action. In this direction,
wenn das die Zeit ist,
if this is time,
ist das die Gegenzeit.
then this is the counter time.
Was ich hier sage, ist jetzt
What I'm trying to say is not something that
das ist erstmal ein
you
Denkbild.
have to believe. It's an image of thinking
Ein Geheimnis der Kunst offenbart, nämlich
that opens up the secret of art, the presence of a future person in the present.
Und wenn jetzt die Mona Lisa, die hier dann irgendwann mal
Mona
steht,
Lisa is standing here at some point.
so ist sie aber hier schon wirksam.
She's finished, but she already has an effect, and she always has an effect on this process at various stages.
Also das heißt, der
That means
Künstler
the artist
verfügt über etwas wie einen inneren Zukunftssinn.
has something like an internal vision of the future, and that's a necessity for creation. That's necessary so that he can create that. He needs that within himself. He needs to have an internal open organ.
Aber das bedeutet, wenn dieser
That
berühmte
means
Satz von Joseph
this very
Beuys,
famous sentence of Joseph Beuys: every person is an artist. Every human being is an artist.
jeder Mensch
That means that every human being within him or herself has such a future
auch wenn das nicht weiß,
organ, even if he doesn't know
dass in
about
jedem
this.
Menschen der Sinn für etwas Notwendiges, was kommen will,
The sense of something that has to come in the future, that of necessity will come in the future. And that's the meaning of the sentence, every human being is an artist. That doesn't mean that every person is a genius, like Leonardo da Vinci or Mozart or Van Gogh, but every human being has the potential within himself or herself for a future sense, the internal necessity that is necessary to create art.
das heißt,
That means,
bin ich bereits schon bei Imi Knoebel,
and that brings me to Imi Knoebel,
seine Arbeit hat
because his work,
diese Arbeit kann man sehr genau beobachten.
you can clearly observe in his work how this process develops.
Für Knoebel war von Anfang an die Frage
Knoebel always asked himself the question, how do I achieve validity? From the very beginning, he had this claim, this intention to achieve that. But he always asked himself, how can I realize this vision? How can I realize this objective? And on this way, his friend Rainer Giese, both of them called themselves Imi. He was the small, the little Imi, he was the big Imi. They worked together in the school of Darmstadt, in the art school of Darmstadt, and they had a very key experience at that time. In the 60s, in the 1960s, they encountered something that was very important to them. Kazimir Malevich, one of the Russians, suprematism, the objectless world, and the image that they saw was the black square. For the two images, this black square was a type of initiation. They experienced in this black square, and in the writings of Malevich, a notion of art which satisfied the highest aspirations, the objectless world. Malevich was talking about the liberated nothing. No objects, no utility, nothing that had to do with everyday life, but just the highest aspiration. You take away everything that you could imagine and you create freedom. He called that the liberated nothing, and for that liberated nothing was symbolized by the black square against a white background. All the notions, all the ideas had to go. It had to be pure emotion, and in this liberated nothingness, the claim of supremacy of art dissolves. And this experience was an experience of initiation for these two young men. There were two young men who didn't really know what they were going to do. They had no idea of how to conduct their profession. Imi Knoebel wanted to become a farmer originally. He didn't want to become an artist, but he somehow ended up at the art school in Darmstadt. And when they saw this image, when they saw this picture, something, they experienced this as their own destiny. They thought that they were there in order to meet these highest aspirations, which is often the case with young men. They had the impression that they could achieve it, and what they thought that they didn't really need any skills or competence in order to achieve that. They were not accomplished painters. No, they were looking at objectless art, the liberated nothingness. In their youthful enthusiasm, they sort of aspired to this highest, artistic objective. They were 18, 19 years old. And they felt an inner vocation. They felt that their path had to meet this highest aspiration, and everything else, the normalcy, was of no interest. they had to fulfill something in them that was within themselves. And several weeks after they had this initiation experience, there was a report in a German newspaper about a happening of the technical University of Aachen, and they saw this image. Those are the two Imis that I mentioned. To the left, Imi Knoebel, and to the right, Imi Gysi, so that you know what they looked like at the time. So youthful, with a lot of ideas, and they had this black square in their mind. Malevich called this the artistic aspiration. And someday this image was reported about in a German newspaper. Joseph Beuys participated in action in 1964 at the Technical University in Aachen, and this photograph was published in many newspapers in Germany and in Europe, and it made Beuys famous at the time. So what you'll see here was during an action. There were demonstrations in the auditorium of the Technical University. There were some crowds, and there was a chemical, a bottle with a chemical fell, and it spilled on a student, and one of the students hit Beuys, and he held up the cross. Beuys held up the cross after that incident, after a student had hit him, and this cross that he was holding up, that cross is on a spiral. And this hand that he was raising, you could misunderstand that very quickly. But he was sort of hitting that cross, and the cross would spring up again because it was on a spring, on a spiral. And then he was distributing chocolates among the people, among the audience. That was his answer, his resonance. His answer to the hit that he received. And when the Imis saw this picture in the newspaper, and it said, "This is a German professor," the Imis said, "That is our man, that's our professor, we have to go there. We have to join him." And that was the second initiation experience, the second event. The first was the claim of absolutism, this black square that I saw, and the second was a professor who was so resolute and so amicable. They felt that this goes together, the absolutism of the black square and the professor who goes into this provocation. That is something that made a great impression on these two young men. And at the beginning, the aspiration of art. Imi understood this is the highest aspiration. He didn't understand anything else, just that this was the highest aspiration, and then combined with a human being who obviously was fighting for this aspiration, was pursuing this, and that's why the two left Darmstadt and went to Düsseldorf, to the Art Academy, in order to study with Joseph Beuys, in order to get to know him. And at the beginning they were always close to Beuys in his classroom, in his studio. They were always trying to get close to him, and at some point, after a certain time, Beuys asked them, what do you want here? What do you want from me? And they said, well, we're interested in what you're doing, and we would like to study with you. We would like to participate in your class. And he said, so, okay, so what do you have to offer? What have you? And Imi said, we have nothing to show you, but we want a special room for ourselves, a special studio. So it was almost as if they wanted to examine Beuys, wanted to see if the power that he had shown, whether he would, how he would react, how he would respond. We have nothing to offer, but we want our own studio. That's what they said. Beuys said, okay, fine. You can have your own studio, you can have your own room, but after 1 year, you have to show me something. Otherwise, you're going to be expelled. So this was a very tough position, and the Imis had their own studio, had their own room to work in, nothing else. So that means that they were successful, they were where they wanted to be, they had achieved what they had planned, and now they had a problem, suddenly. They had a room, studio, but nothing to work with yet. And the interesting part, and I'm telling the story to show you, to make it clear that this demand of nothingness that Malevich had posited coincided with what they had to show. Nothing. So they were very proud. We are basically fulfilling the conditions of nothingness. So Beuys really responded to that. But now they had a problem, because they had their own room, they were standing in their own room, room number 19. Room 19 was a smaller studio next to the main studio, room 20. That was actually the Beuys classroom where I was working too. And now they were there in this room 19, and Imi always told the story, well, you have to show something, we had to produce something, we had to show something. They didn't really know how to start. And then they started in a very simple way. And I would like to describe the development of Imi Knoebel in this context. In the Werkkunstschule in Darmstadt, he had drawn lines, graphic lines. That's how he started. And then he made pictures that only had lines on them. And these paintings, I think there were 50 of these paintings with lines of different thicknesses, different spacing, but always lines. And now I have to say something about myself. I saw the work of Imi Knoebel. But when I saw his first work, it was these line paintings, because every year the students of the Academy had to show their works, and in 1966 and 1967 I saw these line paintings by Imi Knoebel, and I saw these paintings, and for example, here you have very lines that are close next to each other. Then he also had paintings with different line spacings, and I saw those lines and I thought I couldn't understand what the point was. I was in this classroom, we had discussions going on about the notion of art, about what art meant, about the aspirations of artists, the so-called expanded notion of art, content, that art has to become active and also has to influence the development of society. That was Joseph Beuys' idea. We were fulfilled. We were by this very large idea, myself included, and then all I saw was lines when I walked around and looked at the work of these students, of course. So then I was asking myself, what does that have to do with our ideas? I couldn't really understand what he was doing, what the point was of these paintings, and because I wasn't able to understand the point, I got very interested in these works of art. For me, the question was, the interesting question was, what drives people, what drives an artist to draw lines simply in this environment of Beuys' classroom? These two people in room 19 were doing something that we didn't know anything about. We saw it for the first time. They had their own key for this room. Not even Beuys was able to enter this room. And then I saw these line paintings. Later, I asked Imi Knoebel about these paintings, and the answer was, well, you can't go wrong with lines, can you? And this was a very striking answer. I'm starting with something where I know that I can't go wrong, that can't be wrong. And I emphasize that because the idea behind this is not knowing how I should start with art, because the black square had already been presented, so what's next? And then you see, all you see is lines. And then the artist says, well, it's something that you cannot go wrong with. So the simplest starting point that you can imagine from a point zero, it wasn't even a start, it was just the search for a start. And that's quite interesting, I think, because the zero is not the number one. I always say you start with one, children start counting 1, 2, 3, the number one is the beginning. But the zero is a step before the beginning. So it's a beginning before the beginning of the search. And that's very important. The zero, the incapacity. The zero becomes effective as incapacity, as the point is not that you already are capable of doing something. The point is that you have to find out what you are supposed to do. So you have to step back to point zero, and this is where you start before you develop capabilities. So how do you continue? What's the next step from there? The next image that I'm showing you. You see the tightness of these lines. The painting gets ever more darker because the lines are becoming ever more dense. The next image. The next image, please. You do certain variations. You have a white image and a dark image. It's always a variant on the same principle. And you present it in many different versions, always a new version, a continuity that stays true to itself. Always with the claim that I don't want to make any mistakes here. I don't want to subjectively enter into this object, but I wait whether something reveals itself to me. For example, here, those are four rectangles, and they form a cross. And this is, of course, closely tied to Malevich experiments, trials. How do I get to a certain point. I have high aspirations, but the black square has already been created and presented. That's not something that I can repeat. So Imi is standing there and he's asking himself, how can I continue? What's the next step? That was the big question he was dealing with. And over months and months, he was working continuously, developing a certain stubbornness, a will that's always combined with a certain exuberance. I want the highest, I want to achieve the highest aspirations, but also combined with that inability, this incapacity that I'm not capable of doing something yet, and between the tension between inability and aspiration is the interesting thing, because normally you sort of develop your capabilities in normal life, but that tension between zero and the highest aspiration is the special thing about a new approach, a new path that he took. And this very high aspiration means that I'm in search of the image as such. However, how do I find it? Because the black square already exists. And by starting to take these steps, I can break down these high aspirations in individual claims. Of course, they don't fulfill these high aspirations that I have. I'm always in conflict. I'm always searching the image as such, the highest image there is. But I only make progress by showing examples which also lead me away from the highest aspiration, from the highest image. And that was the basic sort of sentiment that Imi Knoebel had at the beginning. And now, how does it continue? These line paintings. And these paintings here, you have to imagine a plywood, a piece of plywood with a canvas, and then the lines are drawn on the canvas, and at some point Imi Knoebel says, all of this is much too complicated. Then he leaves out the lines, and then he only has the white canvas to work with, and then the canvas also gets too complicated, and he removes the canvas, and then he just has the plywood, the stretcher, the square, and at the same time his high aspiration. And you see how this whole thing moves down to earth. You end up with the reality, the plywood frame, and at the same time he was asking the question of the absolute image of the next slide. He had a projector, a slide projector. Right, and then he said, that is a wonderful image. I didn't paint it. It's the slide, and I'm throwing this image on the wall, and I end up with the image I was looking for. But it's actually too much. The next image, I paint the square with white paint on the wall. That's the next little step. it's an image in which I don't interfere, an image in which I'm completely restrained. And that was the next step. And then there's another step that I cannot show here. He also leaves that out, and he only writes down the measurements of the image. So, for example, 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters. He writes that on the wall, just the measurements, so that you don't see an image. The image is completely immaterial, so to speak. And now something interesting, something strange is happening. He's playing with the projector. And he's focused on that rectangle. And the next image, the next slide shows that if he projects the image into a corner, or the projector is slanted, then he suddenly has not a rectangle, but a new shape. And he experiences this new shape now. The basis for this new shape is the rectangle, the most minimalistic, the simplest shape, but now he creates a new shape out of this rectangle. And Imi experiences these projections, as he calls them, as a gift that are supplied to him from the outside, but he stays true to the rectangle. So he moves from the square to the rectangle, and suddenly he experiences that his own work provides new shapes from the outside. He doesn't determine the shapes, but they come to him externally from outside, and then all of these new projections happen, he photographs them. And here you see a number of examples of such projections, different shapes, and he enjoys the fullness of these shapes, the wealth of these new shapes that are that he receives as a gift. It's not something he creates, he receives them as a gift. Based on this very simple process that he started, the projections of the rectangle. The next image also, this is almost nothing. It's a slide in a projector, painted, and then he scratches lines into the painting. Or two lines, and then he runs them through projections, an infinite number of projections. And all he does is scratching these lines into the slide. So he's doing something very simple, that's something I can be responsible for, but the result is something that is given to me from the outside. It's a gift that I receive. So now there's a problem. He has the feeling, I'm losing myself in the universe, I'm losing myself in the nothingness, I have nothing in my hands anymore. And of course this is the ultimate freedom. It releases me from the earth, but at the same time I have my plywood plate where I drew the lines, and this plywood keeps me down, keeps me grounded. So he said, I have the feeling I really have to avoid floating into the universe. I have to force myself to stay on earth. I have to remain grounded. And from this contrary experience from floating into the sky and at the same time having to stay grounded. This new image is created in Rome 19. There are all these shapes that you can see here at DiaTalks as Room 19. For example, this shape here is nothing else but an image of the window, an imitation of the window. She starts with these very simple shapes, cubes, the other shapes. Creates these shapes, these very simple shapes without frames. I remember one experience. One day I came from the boys' class, which was at the end of the corridor, and I wanted to leave the classroom, and the two Imis came toward me, and the small Imi at one point pulled out this little frame and showed it to me. So this is the same frame, and there was another one. This frame does not belong in the collection, as you can see. This is the small one on the left. So you have to imagine the Art Academy. This frame is basically the background of an image, of a picture, of a painting. You don't see it. It's invisible always. And Imi said, but that's also an image. It's also a picture. So you have to make the invisible visible. And there was enormous joy associated with that. I don't have to paint. I have the image already. I have a painting that really fulfills all the requirements, all the demands. At one point, he held this frame over his head as a sign of a validity which is very humble in its essence. This is spruce. This is the simplest and cheapest wood. No big aspirations, but the aspiration is the seriousness and the strictness. It's a universal sign, symbol of an image of imagelessness, if you want. And this frame was later presented as an edition of 1,000. An edition of 1,000 frames, a sign of art, a symbol of art. And this is how the story continues. I'm going to show you some more slides. The next one, you see Imi on the ladder, working in room 19, setting up all these elements. And this was the work that he showed to Beuys after a year, because Beuys said after a year you have to show something, you have to show what you produce. And this is what he produced. In this room 19, there was an inventory suddenly, an inventory created with highest aspirations of precision, projections, and the next image, the frame again, and this is one version of room 19. This was established like that decades ago, and with that, this was the first. Imi had fulfilled his first task, if you want, with this work of art. I'm going to show you 4 other examples of his work. The work of the big Imi Giese, that was created, that were created at the same time. No, you can't see anything. Yeah. This is one piece of paper, and he cut a little triangle with a needle, and so he started in a very primitive way, in a similar way as the little Imi, and then he created these shapes. The big Imi worked in a much more mathematical way. If you look at the next image, very simple graphite painting reduced to the simplest shapes and forms. The next image, same, shows that too. So these two Imis never cooperated, never collaborated. They were always together in the same room, but there's not a single work of art that they collaborated on, with one exception. And the exception was this, a film on Imi and Imi for an event in Heidelberg. That's how it was announced. And this film was nothing but the fact that they presented themselves together. And when people asked, so where is your film? Where can we see your film? And they said, oh, it's running now. Then people went to the film room, but there was nothing there, because the film was that they presented themselves together. That was the only joint work, the only work they collaborated on. So now I would like to take a little leap. This action happened in 1969, and I would like to make a jump to an exhibition in Düsseldorf in 1975. That was the only solo exhibition in the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf that Imi Knoebel did, and it consisted of, you can see this image here, it's a series, it's similar to lines, but now we're talking about larger images, larger pictures that were presented in. Every image was 1 centimeter smaller, so 11 images taken together as one, combined into one. And the next image, you can still see the influence of Malevich very strongly in this work. Now something very special happens, something that played a large role in his work. The next image, next slide, and later he reports, later he tells the story of how important that was, how decisive that this was. This shape here, he calls these the dragon images. Big kites, sort of slanted images with different angles. It's not easy to see here, but it continues like this, like a kite. But for him, the experience, the important thing of this exhibition was that for the first time he used a rectangle, this rectangle, and he hung it in a slanted manner. And that was, for him, a very big step. For the first time he made a decision to present a rectangle in a slanted way, and he felt that this was a liberation. He took responsibility, he made that decision, a new form of presentation, and that was a very deep experience for him, an experience of liberation. He liberated himself from this straight rectangle. And you see, this example shows how this internal process leads to something that opens up new worlds. You cannot really see much from the outside. And Imi himself, he wasn't even, he didn't even go to the opening of this show. He stayed away, he went to a pub 300-400 meters away from the show, and he really enjoyed that from a distance. And in this show, in this exhibition, 6 wardrobes, 6 cabinets were shown, and these are also owned by DiaTalks. And these 6 wardrobes have a number of shelves, I don't know how many shelves, and they have drawings, 250,000 drawings, 250,000 sheets of paper, and every paper has lines drawn by pencil lines in an infinite number of infinite variations. So one line is, for example, lines at a distance of 1 millimeter of each other. The next, maybe the next sheet, 2 millimeters, and so on. So for 4 years, all Imi did was drawing these pencil lines, 250,000 sheets of paper. And then I asked him, wasn't that terribly boring to draw lines from morning to night? And he said, no, why should that be boring? To the contrary, you're liberated, you know exactly what you have to do. You have a plan, you have an idea, and these 4 years were wonderful for him. You know, that's a beautiful thing. I can draw my lines, and all these lines were put in these cabinets. And if you wanted to see the drawings, you had to ask, but nobody ever did. But because the interesting thing is, you might be laughing, but I have to tell you one thing, whether you believe it or not, these lines on their own were really beautiful. I can't explain why. It was very thin paper, and you could see the lines, you could see with how much love and attention it was produced. I cannot explain it. You have to see it. But you don't really see them because they are in these cabinets, so you don't even know what the point is. What is the work of art? Is it the cabinets, or is it the content of the cabinets? And you can, these are processes that take place internally in your soul, and you can see them externally, or you cannot see them. And something that Imi published a catalogue for this show, for this exhibition, and this catalogue consisted of nothing else but 54 photographs of the starry sky. 54 images, 54 photos of a starry sky, and there was one star added to every photo, 1 point that he wasn't able to find ever again later, but he tried. So you had the infinite sky, which was an expansion of his projection idea applied to the universe, plus one additional star, his personal ego point, which you wouldn't be able to find anymore later. And we don't even know whether that's true, whether he really did that. So, Imi himself wasn't able to find the points. He just explained this is what he did. But this, the high aspiration, the universal idea, and what is my role in this, in the universe? A minimal role, but nevertheless it was added. So it's an interesting idea, an interesting way to think about art. You think about it like a child, maybe. And in 1970, this work, go back to the previous one. You see, this is where is Imi in this image, in this photo? Here? Or here? You have to imagine you're forced to internalize the imagination, to internalize the thinking. That's how it continued in 1972. There was an action. He scratched an X into a slide, and then he drove through Darmstadt in his car, and he projected that X on the facades of the houses. And so this X changed, of course, changed constantly, and he called this work the X projection, projection X. Next image. Not quite.
So, das war 1972.
That was in 1972.
Und jetzt kommt wieder ein ganz, ich lasse immer Sachen raus.
I'm leaving some things out, but I would like to show certain stages in his artistic life. And the next stage was up to now, all his works had been in black and white, all of them, with the exception of the plywood frame. But later, Imi said color was very important to him, but initially he hadn't worked with color at all. And when I asked why, he said, well, he had enormous respect of colors, and he didn't dare to choose specific colors. In 1975, in the year of this exhibit at the Kunsthalle, where he showed the slanted rectangle, he had an urge to start using color, and then he had the idea, well, what color do I take? What color do I choose? And then his idea was, I'm going to choose green, because green is the most important color for me. In nature you find a lot of green, that's the most natural color in the world, green, color green. But which green? Yes, of course, you have to. You see the spark and how he was thinking, which green do I choose? And then he discussed it with Blinky Palermo for days. He went to all types of color stores with his friend, and he searched for the ideal green. What's the right green? And he had a very... And he didn't really find it, and then he tried out a specific green. And then he also went away from the rectangle. He also had the idea that he had to liberate the form, he had to liberate the shape, because form and color had a certain relationship. And then he created that that shape with 7 angles, and that was a trial. It was an experiment. He always felt this is not really what I'm looking for. It's not the right green yet. So then he went back. And he took his rectangles and put them together in various ways, and then he painted these rectangles with Menige. Menige is an anti-corrosion paint. It's a pre-paint, so to speak, that you use as a subcoat. It's not a real color, that's why he chose it. But it is, of course, a color. It's orange and it pales over time, and this is something that fascinated him because he chose a color which is really not a real color in order to be able to figure out what the ideal color would be. So he called this the Menige series. And this shows Blinky Palermo, his friend. They were friends, of course. And then the next step happened in 1977, 2 years later. He suddenly got an invitation from Heiner Friedrich, who participated in the foundation of, in the setting up of the Art Foundation. So he had his first exhibition, his first show with colored paintings, and he calls them 24 colors for Blinky Palermo, because Blinky Palermo died in 1977, and he dedicated this show to his late friend. And for the first time, he utilizes colors, and the question, what colors did you choose? He said, I chose all the colors. My personal colors, and this was the basis of this exhibition, free shapes. He so broke them all, so to speak. And this exhibition also was at Dia here in 1980, if I understood correctly. One of these images, the 24 colors, which are representative of all his personal colors. There was one image, entitled American Wall. 3 paintings on top of each other, 3 colors on top of each other, and for the first time he had this inspiration. For the first time he used the 3 basic colors, blue, red and yellow. And when these colors turned up for the first time, this was for him a challenge to develop a new subject. And the next image shows the 24 colors again, but this American Wall inspired him to deal with the basic colors. And he had the idea that this is how he should start, with the primary colors. And this is how the next image then was developed. He used those basic colors, red, blue, and yellow. He called these the knife cuts. And at the same time, he creates these large images, always in the primary colors, red, blue, yellow. Red, yellow, blue. There are many paintings like that. There's a whole series of works, red, yellow, blue. This image, the ones that were hung on the wall, and sometimes he took them down and just stacked them like this. The next one, just the primary colors, red, yellow and blue. And these knife cuts were the first models for his church windows in the Cathedral of Graz. this is what he fell back on. And today you have in this cathedral, the Reims Cathedral, 3 windows by Chagall, and then on the right side 3 windows by Knoebel, and 6 more on the other side. So you have 9 windows in total. And these were the first steps in that direction, which then later led to these glass windows in the Reims Cathedral. As you can see here, these are images of the Cathedral of Reims. That was a very nice one that you just showed. That's Imi with his grandchild, with his granddaughter, standing in front of the cathedral. Because you look at this, artists are like children. They experience their works of art as gifts, although there's a lot of systematic work behind it. And when the work is done, it's like a revelation, it's like a release, and this image shows that feeling of release. And I'm trying to describe his path very clearly, because it shows that somebody is starting from zero, systematically, step by step, moves toward to the result. He's creating something new step by step, and he experiences it as a gift at every step. The next painting, 51.
Das ist Museum in Duisburg.
That's the museum in Duisburg. And what you can see here
ist ein riesengroßer
is a giant
Raum, so ähnlich aus dem gleichen Material wie der Raum 19.
Plywood room, similar material as used in Room 19, and this has the size of a studio, really. All these objects that you see here, this object to the left and to the right, these are outside of it. Those were remnants from previous works. So imagine this huge cube, huge plywood cube. This is basically as big as the entire studio. So what you see here is the interior shown. Externally, and if you think about the external side is the entire world, and then it sort of collapses. So I bring the interior to the outside, and as a result of that, the entire world is concentrated, is internalized, but it's invisible, actually. You have the entire world in a concentrated form. So he continues in the same vein, he continues his work along these lines. Maybe we should show the same thing, the plywood rooms. This is Richard I, the title of this work of art. This relates to a work by Richard Long. In the Museum of Ottersloe, he had a work that was hanging on the wall, and Imi was invited to do an exhibition, and that work couldn't be removed, so he simply built a plywood wall around it, and that's why he calls that Richard I. And then he continues, and he calls these vision, ordinary vision, vision ordinaire. So it's always the same motive, always the same he continued this work. It became a series, and then you have the same elements, plywood, a black square in the background, and then the kite, the slanted rectangle again in 1992, a new phase where he uses scrap pieces and he puts them together and creates sculptures from them. And this, in 1982, there was a war in the Near East, Beirut, the Lebanon crisis, maybe you remember it. And there was a lot of war reporting that you heard on the radio, and he wasn't able to stand it anymore. The misery that was created, these war reports, these war stories, and this is how this work developed. Radio Beirut, because he was always listening to the radio, listening to these war reports. And the next image, that's the radio. So suddenly you see these emotional works of art determined by this experience of war made of scrap materials. And then another very important work entitled Property, Heavenly Realm. And this was dedicated to his late friend who died, who committed suicide. And in one of these works, these are pieces that reminded him. These are pieces that reminded him of his late friend, and they almost have a religious component based on the title of these works, in memoriam of his friend. And those were these various stages in his artistic life, which one could continue. But I think it would be a good idea to maybe come to an end now. I just wanted to present to you the principle of his work, the step-by-step development, and every step is something that developed out of a certain necessity. I would like to stop. Of course, you can always interrupt me and ask questions. But I would like to come to an end with a work that doesn't really exist. It's a work of art that was, I don't remember exactly, since 1993 he had an idea of a large work of art that was never executed, that hasn't been executed yet, in front of the provincial government in Dresden. He wanted to build a wall on this large square, 10 meters high. And he wanted yellow tiles on the outside. Tiles from Meissen, because Imi Knoebel was born in the area of Dresden, and the tiles are very valuable. It's a very valuable material. So just imagine a huge square, larger than several soccer fields, a 10-meter high wall, and on top of the wall, he wanted to have a crown made of sandstone, and below a bench made of the same material, sandstone, so that you can sit sort of with the back against the wall. And in this field, that you couldn't really enter because it had only one door a copper door in one spot that was meant for gardeners who had to work in this area. They were supposed to plant trees in this area, and the idea was that this was an area that nobody was ever able to enter. A space that people had abandoned voluntarily, had given over to nature voluntarily. So it is the opposite of an image that you cannot really enter either. But it was supposed to be a space that man had voluntarily handed over to nature. This is a work that never really was created, but it was an idea in his head, where the beautiful girls are growing on the trees. That was supposed to be. This is an old song, a folk song from Saxony, a children's song. 3 riders on their horses. Where do they come from? From Sachsen, from Saxony, where the beautiful girls are growing on the trees. It rhymes in German. And if I had thought of that, if I had thought of it, I would have brought one for you, brought one with you for me. So it was a work that was never created. Imi is still looking for an opportunity to realize this idea. Space that is given up voluntarily, where after a certain time you only see the crowns of the trees. And that is sort of the last image that I would like to present, an invisible image, so to speak, that only exists in his head.
Will you take some questions?
Yes, sure.
Or anybody wants to stay?
Sure.
Does anybody have a question? If not, we can ask them casually.
Is he still alive?
Yes.
Ja, lebt er noch?
Ja,
Imi Knoebel? Yes, he's still alive.
Es wird dieses Jahr des 1979
He's going to be 79 this year. On December 31st, he lives in Düsseldorf. I also have a question. I'm going to ask it in German for me.
Hätte ich gerne gewusst, wie es ausgegangen ist nach dem einen Jahr. Wie Herr Beuys reagiert hat auf die Arbeit.
How did Mr. Beuys react to the work of these 2 artists who received that, who gave the studio? Beuys reacted by letting them work, because he realized that this was a very important accent also for him as a teacher, to open his classroom for certain artists who were not necessarily his disciples. That was very important to him, because Beuys, as a teacher, I was a student of his for a year, and I didn't even know what he was doing. I thought that his art consisted in his teaching. And that was a very important experience for me, to experience an artist who didn't present anything, who didn't have any shows, but who was almost like a midwife. And we were very free to create our art. And for Beuys, it was very important that art was not always influenced by him. And I think the Imis were very important, and he let them work, he let them create. And at the beginning, it was not very clear. To me, it was not clear where the connection was. But it was sort of a real contrast to what happened in his classroom. And it became ever more interesting for me, and later I realized that these contrasts, this opposition, really made the notion of art shine in its entirety, and I think Beuys knew that, and he felt that. And the role of the nothingness is very important, of course. Imi, starting at zero, art is not sort of a reflection of talent, of skill, of genius, but art has to start at ground zero. Every human being is an artist, or can be an artist. Everything that is created from free work is artistic. But of course the prerequisite is that you start at zero, because anything that doesn't start at zero is already present and is not developed freely and independently. And I think this point, this aspect is very important for every human being. If you apply that to life, you can say that every human being, even if there's nothing, even if there's no foundation, you can start. You have to find the nothingness in yourself first, because if you're burdened with other influences from the beginning, if you don't know where these originate, where these influences originate, it's important to let something develop from nothingness, because new things have to start in this way, without an influence, without external influence. And this leads to a different internal attitude than something that is based on competence, on talent. If you start from zero, this is very important, that this is possible. This is very important for artistic creation.
How long time during his evolution did it take before he became acceptable among his?
Ja, wie lange hat es gedauert, bis man ihn akzeptiert hat, praktisch als Künstler?
Imi Knoebel, es gibt sehr viele Kollegen von Imi
There are many
Knoebel,
colleagues
die sind schnell bekannt geworden.
who became popular and became very well known very quickly. For example, Jörg Immendorff or Sigmar Polke, other artists. Knoebel was unknown for a very long time. The curve was very flat and it developed very slowly, and then suddenly there was exponential sort of growth of popularity. A lot of and he was not interested in that. He was only interested in pursuing his own principles and pursuing his own ideas. It took a very, very long time for him to become known and accepted and respected. I think the breakthrough, well, I don't know. Of course he was invited to create these windows for the glass cathedral, but it took a very long time and it was a very slow process, and Rainer Friedrich, who participated in the Art Foundation, discovered him very early and recognized the quality of his work, because the art of Imi Knoebel is not loud, it's not something that is easily graspable. It's something, it's consistent in itself, and that's why it took a very long time for him to become recognized.
Vielleicht sollte man zum Schluss noch mal darauf hinweisen.
Maybe at the end we should point out that
damit eine bestimmte Phase der Kunst
a certain phase of art had reached its completion.
Und dass man heute
And today, I think we're standing, we have to find a new beginning. What we need is social sculpture, as Beuys called it, that the notion of art is applied to one's own work, no matter what one does or what one creates, and one can also apply it to a new reshaping of society, because today we are at a crossroads, and you see that all the forms of society don't work anymore. Suddenly we're confronted with the fact that traditions were such and such and such, but now we have to find a new beginning. That the ground zero idea can now be applied to society at large. Imi Knoebel at some point, can we show the image number 76? Imi Knoebel founded an association called Star for Children, Kinderstern, and that is an organization that collects money for children, for needy children. But lately we've seen these Friday protests, Greta Thunberg. Everybody's asking, children are now asking themselves, how are we going to continue? We're now at a new beginning, and what Knoebel did was a sort of a model for something much larger than himself and his art.
Ich danke Ihnen ganz herzlich für
Ihre
Initiative.
Sehr gerne.